The topic today, how to break the code of academic language, your ELLs and standard English learners bridge to more rigorous content. You'll hear directly from 5 of the top thought leaders in the field of ELL and SEL education: Ivannia Soto, Jeff Zwiers, David and Yvonne Freeman, and Margarita Calderon. Today's discussion is drawn largely from their all-new 4-volume book series entitled Academic Language Mastery, which is now available from Corwin. More details about the series at the end of the webinar. Ivannia, the series editor, is going to begin by presenting some quick background on academic language and the big need in the field. But first, a bit about Ivannia. Ivannia is Associate Professor of Education at Whittier College, where she specializes in second language acquisition, systemic reform for English language learners, and urban education. She has presented on literacy and language topics at various conferences and has provided technical assistance for systemic reform for ELLs in Title III, most notably in the state of California. I now would like to pass our presentation over to Ivannia. Ivannia, you're all set.
Thank you, Jeff. The vision for this academic language mastery series is to assist educators in developing expertise in and practical strategies for addressing the 4 key dimensions of academic language when working with ELLs and SELs. First, I'd like to unpack recent ELL demographic trends. ELLs represent the fastest growing segment of the school-age population. And while the overall number of school-age children grew by 19% between 1979 to 2003, the number of ELLs grew by 124%. And by 2030, ELLs will comprise 40% of elementary and secondary students. Another group of students we've addressed within our book series are standard English learners, and you may know a little bit less about this group of students. Standard English learners have combined their intuitive knowledge of their indigenous language structures with newly acquired English vocabulary in order to create whole new languages that provide that have proved to be quite functional in their new surroundings. So there are systems behind these new language sets that have been created. Standard English learners, there are different kinds of standard English learners. Some African American students speak African American vernacular English. Some Mexican American students speak Chicano English. Some Hawaiian American students speak Hawaiian Pidgin, and some Native American students speak Native American English. We do not have a systematic way currently to approach the language acquisition needs of our standard English learners. But what we do know is that the home language and literacy practices of standard English learners oftentimes do not match those provided in school. Oftentimes being read to is not a part of a standard English learner's early literacy experience. However, storytelling may be a part of these early literacy experiences, which is something that must be built upon and viewed as an asset. Additionally, the narrative discourse patterns oftentimes do not match the discourse patterns found within schools, nor do the phonological sound pools match those found within our educational settings. All students can benefit from academic language development modeling, scaffolding, and practice, but ELLs and SELs need it to survive and thrive in school. ELLs have plenty of language assets, language that we must leverage to grow their academic English. Yet there is often a very clear language and literacy gap that must be closed as soon as ELLs enter school. Similarly, SELs come to school with a language variation that, in order to be built upon in the classroom setting, must first be understood. In order to systemically address the needs of ELLs and SELs, we educators must share a common understanding of academic language development. Lily Wong Fillmore defines academic language as the language of text, the forms of speech and written discourse that are linguistic resources educated people in our society can draw on. This is language that is capable of supporting complex thought, argumentation, literacy, and successful learning. It is the language used in written and spoken communication in college and beyond. And given that we are preparing ELLs and SELs for college, career, and beyond, they should receive ample opportunities to learn and use academic language, both with scaffolded access to cognitively and linguistically demanding content, which allows them to cultivate their complex thinking and argumentation. In reviewing the wide range of literature by experts in the field, most agree that the key elements of academic English language for ELLs and SELs include these 4 dimensions of language: academic vocabulary, syntax and grammar, discourse, as well as unique components of our book series, Culturally Responsive Teaching. We have therefore organized this book series around these 4 dimensions of academic English: conversational discourse, written by Zwiers, which focuses on developing students' conversational skills as an avenue for fostering academic language and thinking in a discipline; academic vocabulary, written by Margarita Calderon, on teaching high-frequency academic words and discipline-specific vocabulary across content areas; syntax and grammar, written by David and Yvonne Freeman, on teaching sophisticated and complex syntactical and grammatical structures in context; and culturally responsive teaching, written by Noma Lemoyne and presented by me today, incorporating culture while addressing and teaching language and honoring students' home cultures and communities. The focus on these 4 dimensions in the book series makes this a unique offering for educators. By building upon the cultural and linguistic similarities of ELLs and SELs, we embed strategies and instructional approaches about academic vocabulary, discourse, and grammar and syntax within culturally responsive teaching practices to make them all accessible to teachers of diverse students. The heart of this book series is to integrate language and culture in a manner that has not been addressed with other books or book series on academic language development. You'll hear more about the series at the end. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleague Jeff Zwiers, who is going to reveal the power of academic conversation in helping students develop language, clarify concepts, comprehend complex text, and fortify thinking and relational skills. First, some quick background on Jeff. Jeff is a senior researcher at the Graduate School of Education and Director of Professional Development for the Understanding Language Initiative, a research and professional learning project focused on improving the education of academic English learners. He has consulted for national and international teacher development projects that promote literacy, lesson design, and formative assessment practices. Take it away, Jeff.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's it going out there? I'm excited to talk about conversational discourse. Let's start with the what of conversational discourse. That's not my dog, by the way. If we advance the slide, take a look at the what of conversational discourse. You don't hear the term conversational discourse at most cocktail parties, so it helps to quickly define it as well as we can here. Oh, and by the way, if you do hear that term at a cocktail party, feel free to invite me. Discourse is language in use, and conversational discourse is language used in conversation. Conversational discourse includes communication skills, strategies, and gestures that facilitate the use of language to communicate and understand. The ultimate goal of conversational discourse in education is more than just chit-chat or even building social skills. It's to get something meaningful done with academic language and content that will help students think and communicate now and in the future. All right, so it finally came up.
Sorry.
Now for the whys of conversational discourse. Why do we do it? Why do we take the time? It's no walk in the park. It's loud, it's messy, it's ever-changing, and it takes time. But is it worth it? You'll have to try it out and be the judge, but a few things to consider are conversational discourse helps to foster academic language. First of all, because there are loads of input. Every other turn, in fact. The student needs to listen and understand what a partner is saying in order to think about what to say next. There's also lots of output. Every other turn, in fact, which forces, in a good way, a student to put developing thoughts together into words and sentences for the partner. And for both input and output, there's what I call mini challenges, in which students push themselves to overcome little gaps in understanding each time they talk and listen. You might describe your solution for global warming. I push myself to understand what you're saying, but you see a quizzical look on my face, and so you push yourself to rephrase your idea so I can understand it. All of this helps to build language. Now, it's not just about language. Conversations can build content skills and understanding in significant ways. When students talk to one another, they need to clarify ideas. This, of course, helps both the person who is clarifying and the person who's listening to clarify complex ideas. They might ask questions, use examples, negotiate definitions, elaborate, draw, or even act out an idea. Second, supporting ideas with evidence and reasoning is vital across disciplines, and conversations push students to practice supporting ideas and asking one another for support. And third, lots of thinking can happen in conversations, such as interpretation, application, argumentation, comparison, and making inferences about causes and effects. All this thinking requires and pushes students to use academic language. Now, for the hows of conversation, or conversational discourse. You might be convinced, but you want to know how. First of all, we must build a classroom culture of conversation. This sounds nice, but it's harder than it looks. Many curricula and established practices in school don't involve authentic purposes or opportunities for students to construct ideas with others. Now tell me, in looking at this balance scale, which side weighs more in terms of fostering deep and lasting learning? Doing school activities to earn points, or communicating and constructing ideas with others for authentic purposes? All right, let's see. As you likely predicted, the left side weighs more in terms of deep and lasting learning that it tends to cultivate. So throughout the year, and especially in the beginning of the year, it's vital to use your teacher creativity and expertise to set up lessons and activities and assessments that value communicating and doing authentic and engaging things with ideas in shared settings. The second how is constructing effective prompts. In my ongoing work with teachers, this pops up repeatedly as a key area for improvement. Many teachers analyze student conversations, see mediocre results, and realize that it was the fault of a shallow or boring prompt. So, in a very small nutshell, consider the following. Make sure there's a purpose for conversing and that it connects to the lesson objectives. Also, make sure that students have different ideas to share with one another. If they don't really need to talk. The prompt should require students to co-construct and do something with ideas. Key prompt terms might include things like create, clarify, argue, come to a consensus, decide, rank, solve, evaluate, compare, choose, fortify, build, and transform, just to name a few. And third, consider how students have been prepared to respond to a prompt, and if not, prepare them. They need to have the material and the skills to talk about in order to work with ideas. Now, speaking of skills, the third how is cultivating conversation skills. There are many skills, and I tend to focus on 4 biggies that help students to build one or more ideas as shown in the center of this slide. First, students need to be able to pose a good idea that's worth talking about. Second, they need to be able to clarify ideas, get on the same page, etc., as I mentioned in the previous slide. Third, they need to support ideas. Then, if another competing idea comes up, as in many arguments, students must use the 3 skills again. Pose, clarify, and support. And then they evaluate the weight of the support and reasoning for each side, compare them, and choose the heaviest one, so to speak. There's often some negotiating and qualifying going on at this point, too, which all makes for interesting academic language use. Okay, our fourth and final how is formative assessment of conversational discourse. Over time, you and your students get better at knowing what to look for when it comes to conversation. A few suggestions include, teachers should observe student conversations, provide feedback, model skills and strategies as needs arise. Peers can use student-friendly tools to help them to reflect on their conversations and provide feedback to one another. And finally, students should self-reflect on their conversations, how they succeeded to build ideas with others, and what they might work on next time to have better conversations. Well, I think I'm out of time, but I hope you got a quick peek into the depths of conversational discourse and how it can help students develop academic language, along with a host of other essential things in classroom settings. I will pass the baton.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, we'll hear directly from David and Yvonne Freeman, who will walk us through the critical role grammar and syntax play in informing ELLs and SELs' grasp of challenging text. I suspect you're all already quite familiar with David and Yvonne's work as long-standing experts in the field. Professor Emeriti at the University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley, they present regularly at international, national, and state conferences. David and Yvonne have also consulted extensively in schools across the United States as well as internationally, and have only just returned from an engagement in Taiwan. David and Yvonne, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Ivannia. If you'll give us the first slide. As we were writing this book about teaching academic grammar and syntax in context, we realized and we tried to set up the whole idea of what is academic language and why is it that emergent bilinguals, those students who are coming to school with one language and then emerging as bilinguals as they learn English, we wanted to help these students because many of them are acquiring conversational language, but not the academic language of school. So the first thing that we need to think about is that academic language is a register of language used in school. And by register, we mean that we use language and we use vocabulary, we use the grammar and the syntax differently in different settings. For example, if I'm talking to my 6-year-old grandson, playing with him, the language I use, the intonation I use, the syntax I use is very different than when I talk to my 14-year-old granddaughter, and is different from when I talk to my neighbor, and very different when I'm talking in an academic setting. So our emergent bilingual students need to learn the academic register of different subjects in order to read, write, and discuss those subjects. Next slide, please. Academic language includes more than just vocabulary. Vocabulary is very important, as you'll hear from the next speaker, but academic language also is characterized by certain grammatical and syntactic features. So as our students study different content areas, they need to develop academic language proficiency that includes the grammar and syntax of the different subject areas. So they need to communicate like mathematicians in math, scientists, they need to communicate like scientists in biology, and in science classes, they need to communicate like social scientists in history, and like literary scholars in language arts. This poster on the left was a poster that we saw in a newcomer school where the teachers really understood that their students needed to understand the language of their content areas. I like it very much. When you enter this classroom, you are mathematicians. You are problem solvers. And we need to help our students understand this as they go into each content area. Next slide, please. Emergent bilinguals acquire some academic some academic grammar and syntax as they read, write, and discuss academic texts. However, they also benefit from some focused instruction on the grammar and syntax of academic language. So we move from the why to the how.
The next slide, please. When we wrote this book, Grammar and Syntax in Context, we wanted to be sure to describe a number of practical strategies. We find that often teachers are not as comfortable with the idea of grammar and syntax, but there really are a lot of practical things that they can do that will help their students. And we thought we'd briefly describe two of those during this webinar. One is called Deconstruct, Reconstruct, and the second one is something I'm sure you're familiar with, and that's the use of sentence frames. So let's go to the first, the Deconstruct, Reconstruct, please. One way to help students understand complex sentences, because we know that the syntax of academic language includes complex sentences, is to help them know how to learn signal words. Signal words are those conjunctions and other devices that people use to connect ideas in a complex sentence. Now, to get students there, one way to do it is to break complex sentences into simple sentences and then put them back into complex sentences. Now, in doing this, we would say that it's extremely important to keep this in context, and it should be in the context of a key passage from their content area textbook. Now, this poster, which we saw in that newcomer school, we really liked it for a lot of reasons. And one is that instead of just teaching weather to students who are beginning and talking about sunny, windy, rainy, and that's important, but they were learning about the different zones like the tropical, temperate, and polar. But one thing we noticed is that their sentences were really quite simple, and they needed to get to writing more complex sentences. So let's look at the next slide, please, for an example. Let's take this couple of sentences from a history text. The early colonists who settled in the new land struggled to become self-sufficient because they lacked familiarity with local conditions. As a result, many of the early colonies failed when colonists planted the wrong crops or planted them at the wrong times. Now, we notice a couple things here. There are really only two sentences, but there are quite a few ideas. And we've put in red the signal words. So the first step is to get students to really use a variety of signal words and to think about how they can use those words to connect simple sentences and put them into complex sentences. So what we'd suggest is to pull a passage like this out of the book, out of their textbook. You could put it up on, you could project this up so they could all see it, and then talk to them and see if they can identify the signal words. Now, if we could go to the next slide, we'll see how the next step in the process. And that is working with the students, break those complex sentences into simple sentences. And for many of our students, this also helps them to really understand the passage. And as we do this, we can talk about which ones of these ideas are more important and which are less important. That gets a little complex, but we're working on academic complexity. Now, if we go to the next slide, so we've identified signal words, we've broken it into simple sentences, and then the third step is to have the students work in pairs or small groups. And Working together, they combine the simple sentences into complex sentences using signal words. And you might want to have lists of signal words up around the room. But take the original passage away, because the goal here is to create something new. Then, as the students report back, you could discuss different ways to reconstruct the passage using different signal words. For example, instead of because, you could use since. Or there are many ways to put these together, and that's what students need to understand. Deconstruct, reconstruct is a good strategy in part because it takes very minimal teacher preparation. You just take a paragraph out of one of your textbooks, and then you work with the students to help them really look at this academic language carefully. If we go to the next slide, we'll see a second simple idea that you could use to help students build academic grammar and syntax.
As we said earlier, using sentence frames is something that teachers use quite frequently, but perhaps they don't think about the fact that this is helping their students develop the syntax of the new language that they're learning. This is a picture of a bulletin board in a classroom we visited, where the teacher and the students had read a book called Iguana Mañana. Iguana Mañana is based on the same kind of storyline as Little Red Hen. And in this story, Iguana is planning a party. All her friends are very enthusiastic, but of course, Iguana ends up doing all the work. So in this bulletin board, the teacher used a pocket chart that's a web. She put students into 6 different groups, and she gave them some key words that she wanted them to understand from the story, like exhausted, or depressed, or disappointed. And she asked the students to take the sentence frame, and with the sentence frame to create a sentence that related to the story. So students wrote things like, Iguana was disappointed, so disappointed, with her friends because they did nothing. Or Iguana was exhausted because she had to do all the work. So the students then created these sentences using the sentence frame, and in this very simple way, they are not only picking up vocabulary and showing they understand the story, they are also beginning to develop the syntax of language. Next slide, please. So we would say that emergent bilinguals need academic language that goes beyond academic vocabulary to succeed in school. Academic vocabulary, as you'll learn in the next talk, is extremely important, but we also need to help our students move beyond that. And so to do that, we need to use strategies that focus on sentence, paragraph, and text-level academic grammar and syntax so that we can really have students who are academically prepared to work in all the different subject areas. We can move on.
Thank you, David and Yvonne. Now we'll hear directly from Margarita Calderon on how academic words are best taught as tools for completing and constructing more complex messages. First, a few words about Margarita, one of the field's top authorities on how to expedite ELL comprehension. For over 25 years, Margarita has been conducting research on English language learners and professional development for content, ELL, special education, and bilingual teachers and administrators. Her focus is integrating the Common Core State Standards into ELL instruction, establishing teacher learning communities, and coaching, supervising teachers with ELL. You're next, Margarita.
Thank you, Ivana. So why vocabulary? Why is vocabulary so important? Well, we know that a command of a large vocabulary bank frequently sets high-achieving students apart from less successful ones. And we also know that the average 6-year-old has a vocabulary of about 8,000 words and learns 3,000 to 5,000 words more per year. So the question here is, how many words are our ELLs and SELs learning per year? Because vocabulary, even in kindergarten, and especially at the end of first grade, becomes a significant predictor of reading comprehension in the middle and high school grades. Unfortunately, it also predicts reading difficulties in middle and high school. Next, please. The Carnegie Corporation of New York funded a 5-year empirical testing of EXCEL, Expediting Comprehension for ELLs. They wanted us to develop a professional development program for mainstream teachers of math, science, social studies, and language arts, as well as ESL and bilingual teachers, for them to integrate not just vocabulary, but also reading comprehension, strategy skills, and writing skills. After 5 years of empirical testing, EXCEL showed great results in New York City schools, in Kauai, later in Charlotte, Salt Lake City, and now we're seeing more refinements in schools in Memphis and a lot of schools in Virginia. Next, please. So, why teach vocabulary before reading, during reading, and after reading? Vocabulary knowledge correlates with reading comprehension, and reading comprehension correlates with procedural and content knowledge. That is, the students will be able to understand all the processes in science and math, as well as learn the content. Because content correlates with academic success, right? It really impacts the test results of ELLs and all students. However, comprehension depends on knowing between 90 to 95% of the words in a text. Moreover, knowing words means explicit instruction, not just exposure. Students will need 12 production opportunities to own a word, even at the pre-teaching stage. Later, as they begin to read, they will learn more words. As they begin to write, the teacher teaches more words. Many of those signal connector words that Bonnie and David were talking about. So it's important that every student understand 90 to 95% of the words in a paragraph, in a sentence, in a chapter, and in a test question. Next slide, please. Teachers teach vocabulary through the 3 tiers. For instance, if they're going to teach something on weather, they'll select words like tropical seas, evaporation, typhoons, because these are subject-specific words. However, without the information processing words, those tier 2 words that nest those tier 3 words in very long sentences sometimes, it will be very difficult for students to understand. Also, those sentences might contain polysemous words, which are multiple meaning words, transition words, connectors, more sophisticated words for rich discussions or for specificity. So some tier 2 words would be like funnel, furthermore, as well as nevertheless. And even though tier 1 words might seem very simple and very basic, it is very important to teach to ELLs, especially the newcomers, because they need these words to communicate, to read, to write, and they will see words like I during the science lesson on weather, and they'll think of the eye in our faces, but not necessarily the eye of the storm or a storm front or the word fall, which is a polysemous word, and fall could be almost anything. Next, please. Teachers select words by using the following criteria. First, is it critical to the understanding of the concept? Will this word appear on a test? Is it really important to the discipline? And do they want to hear it in their partner verbal summaries, in their partner discussions, and also do they want to see it in writing? Next slide, please. There are 7 steps for pre-teaching vocabulary. This is only for pre-teaching. For instance, step number 1, the teacher says the word or phrase and asks the students to repeat it 3 times. This is for pronunciation purposes. Step number 2, the teacher states the word in context from the text. That is, the teacher pulls the whole sentence from the text that the students are about to read and posts that along with the 7 steps on a PowerPoint or on a smartboard so that students can see all these 7 steps. Step number 3, the teacher provides the dictionary definition. We don't want to send the darlings to the dictionary because we know what's going to happen there, especially if it's a polysemous word. And then step number 4, teachers provide a student-friendly definition right after the dictionary definition, just to make sure that the students are really understanding the meaning, the true meaning of the word and how it will be used in this particular context. Steps number 1 through 5 should take the teacher only 1 minute, maybe 1 minute and a half, or yes, 2 minutes at the beginning, but that's it, because we want 5 words to be taught, and it should only take anywhere from 10 to 12 minutes to teach these words. But step number 6 is the most important one of all. This is where the students engage in those 12 production opportunities, the input-output that Jeff mentioned. Each student with a buddy will give 6 examples using the word in context, either from a frame or a sentence starter that the teacher gives, and then the other will give 6 in ping-pong style so that they're communicating, building upon each other's sentences. And then finally, number 7, which only should take a couple of seconds, but this is the accountability step. This is where the teacher holds the students accountable for learning the word and making sure that they're going to be using it throughout the day, throughout the classes, in their verbal discussions, their exit passes, or any writing assignments. Next, please. ELLs and SELs can master 20 to 25 words per day. Each teacher at the elementary schools can be teaching 5 words per subject area per day, and that would only take 10 to 12 minutes at the beginning of each subject area, but it would help the students tremendously. At the middle and high schools, it is critically more important because the students need to accelerate their language learning, and they have to learn all these words in order to be able to comprehend the text and do the type of writing that high school requires. So the biology teachers, chemistry teachers, even the AP language arts teachers and honors courses teachers are all teaching 5 words at the beginning of each period in order for students to be able to delve deeper into those texts, because we want all students to be reading, but they need this assistance in order to follow through and be successful in all their content areas, in all the subject areas. So it takes a whole school to help the ELLs and the SELs become successful in all. Well, thank you very much, and hope to see you in my book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Margarita. The final book in the series is Culture and Context, which I will be presenting on behalf of co-author Noma Lemoyne. Geneva Gay, founding mother of culturally responsive pedagogy, suggests that culture counts. Cultural and linguistic diversity are strengths that, when affirmed and integrated into instruction, become useful rubrics for addressing the learning needs of diverse student populations. This quote suggests that we must integrate and affirm both culture and language in the classroom setting, which is oftentimes the missing piece in classrooms. Even if we address language, we oftentimes do not unpack culture. Similarly, Sabine Ulibarri, American poet and great thinker of modern Hispanic literature, suggests language is culture. It carries with it traditions, customs, the very life of a people. You cannot separate one from the other. To love one is to love the other. To hate one is to hate the other. If one wants to destroy a people, take away their language, and their culture will soon disappear. In my work with teachers, I like to say that when we disparage language, we denigrate culture. And instead, we must view whatever language set that ELLs and SELs bring to the table as assets that must be built upon. In order to do that, we must understand our students' cultural backgrounds and integrate culturally responsive teaching into our daily practices. The academic language mastery book in the series on culture and context will unpack the instructional practices of culturally responsive teachers, including the 4 approaches and strategies that can be used in the classroom setting. The first approach is to build personal knowledge and understanding of the culture, languages, and linguistic histories of ELLs and SELs in your classroom, and methods for integrating that knowledge into core instruction. Some of the strategies that teachers can use
Hi, Ivannia, we lost your sound.
how many of them noted at least 3 languages / language variations that they used across a day. One student noted, I use Spanish with my mother, I use Spanglish with my grandfather, I use English with my friends, and I try to use academic English in the classroom setting. So it was a really powerful experience. Another strategy for approach number 1 is to take the time, either school-wide or with cohorts of teachers, to shadow an English language learner or a standard English learner with a focus on their language usage and classroom interactions. And ELL shadowing is a process by which we go into classrooms, and ELL or SEL shadowing, we go into classrooms and we monitor at every 5-minute, the start of every 5-minute interval, the academic oral language production of an English language learner or a standard English learner. It really puts language at the forefront for teachers as they go into classrooms, typically to observe other teachers, and instead now they're going into classrooms to observe an English learner or a standard English learner and focus in on how they can change their daily language lessons to meet the needs of ELLs and SELs. Professional learning communities, lesson studies, or instructional rounds can be conducted with a focus on culture, language, and linguistic histories, so that there is this systemic vision for meeting the needs of ELLs and SELs across a school day. Approach number 2, infusing the history, culture, and canons of literature of ELL and SEL populations into the learning environment and instructional design, And a way that some strategies that can be used to address this particular approach is to have students view video clips from a PBS series called Do You Speak American? Or The Story of Language, which unpacks language variation. For example, Do You Speak American unpacks what Chicano English is by interviewing students who use that particular language variation. This allows the students within the classroom to take a look at, if they speak Chicano English, to take a look at that particular language variation as an asset, right? And then also to contrast that language with academic English. Students can also create family trees, bring cultural artifacts to class. A way to integrate technology with this particular strategy is to have students create their own Ancestry.com page after they've done some family research of their own. Lastly, for approach number 2 is to have students engage in community activities such as community mapping for social and cultural capital within the community. After students have traced these particular areas in their communities, they can write a newsletter to the rest of the school with these features included. The third approach is to use second language acquisition methods that include contrastive analysis and other strategies that support language acquisition of school language and literacy. Some of these strategies, we have 2 that are included that address contrastive analysis. The first is contextual contrastive analysis. The teacher can read a story aloud that is written in a non-standard form and have students retell the story in academic English. An example of this is a children's book called Flossie and the Fox, which is written entirely in the African American vernacular English. Students can then either orally retell the story, or in groups they can rewrite portions of the story in academic English. Similarly, linguistic contrastive analysis, the teacher can use literature, songs, or plays to contrast syntactical and grammatical structures between the language variation and academic English. A relevant example of this, students may bring in hip-hop lyrics, songs that they like and the lyrics that are appropriate, of course. And students can contrast the language and take a look at what are the syntactical forms, right? So the use of repetition throughout a particular hip-hop lyric. And they can similarly unpack and analyze the grammatical structures. The fourth approach is design instruction around the learning styles and strengths of ELLs and SELs. And some of these strategies you might recognize. And in this case, you might take a look at instead how these strategies provide cultural benefits in addition to language benefits. So a strategy like intentional grouping and pods, right? Placing students into groups so that they are heterogeneously grouped, so that there is a balance of language models within the group alongside of ELLs, and so that we have diverse backgrounds and experiences also represented within the group. Once we have these intentional groups and pods structured in our classroom, we can easily incorporate instructional conversations, the kinds of conversations that Jeff addressed earlier in the webinar, as part of our daily academic discourse. When I train pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, I typically have them think through the 15-minute rule. Most of us typically can't listen for any more than 15 minutes at a time. So we thank you for listening the entire way through here. And so having stopping points and those open-ended questions, right, that require more higher order thinking, allow for that daily academic discourse. Language, we must find language in the curriculum. We have to plan for language or it won't happen. And then lastly, when we intentionally group students, when we make instructional conversations a part of our daily academic discourse, then students can support each other. ultimately we want to remove competition from the environment. We want to make sure, since many of our students of color prefer communal orientations, that they are working on collaboration, that they are taking language risks with each other because they feel comfortable doing so. And so that is it for our presentation. We hope that it was helpful. In these last few minutes, we'd like to open up the floor to any questions, and Jeff has been helping kind of organize these questions, and he will let each of the authors know which of us the question is addressed to. And you can submit questions through the chat box if you haven't done so already. So go ahead and take it away, Jeff.
Terrific, thank you very much. And this is from Sharon Merritt for everybody. I teach single subject student teachers in a linguistics course for content-focused teachers. I'd like to know how the presenters would help such student teachers understand that they are, in fact, language teachers.
I had an idea that I might jump in because I've been in that situation where I've had language arts teachers, science teachers, math teachers all in a class. This is David Freeman, by the way. And one thing that struck me that would be a way to help them understand that they need to be language teachers is, for example, put a biology teacher and a social studies teacher together, and the biology teacher could give the social studies teacher a passage from the biology book that's pretty technical, and have that social studies teacher, who's a peer, read it and talk about why it's kind of hard to read. I think if we could pair up people from different disciplines, you put the math teacher with a language arts teacher, then it would become more apparent to them that what for say the math teacher is easy to read, for the language arts teacher might be quite hard to read, and vice versa. And that might just at least raise an awareness that they do need to teach the language.
I might just add that probably the person who asked the question is very aware of this, but that the math teacher, the science teacher, the social studies teacher doesn't really even understand what the features are of their content academic language. So part of the problem also, and I consider this a problem because it's true that especially at secondary level, teachers do not think that content teachers don't see themselves as language teachers. They need to see a need to understand what the features are of their content academic language.
Terrific, thank you. I have another question from Elizabeth Catlin for David and Yvonne. How do you explain to students what a signal word is? How do you define it?
Well, fairly simply, a signal word is a conjunction or conjunctive phrase, and it signals a relationship between ideas in a couple of sentences or phrases on either side. So, for example, because signals that this is cause and effect. On the other hand, signals that we're going to get a contrast. So I think that's one way to think about it. You can just call them conjunctions, but using the term signal words helps students to understand that you're showing a relationship.
And you may want to categorize the types of relationships that you need to write about or talk about. And then as you're reading with students, you would have students keep a list of compare and contrast, or a list of cause and effect kinds of words, so that the students then can use them as they write or as they talk.
Terrific. Thank you. You know, just to let everybody know, we're receiving quite a few questions, and I doubt we'll get to them all, but we will answer all of them and send them out to you as an email during the week. So here's another question from Ann McNeil. I am an English teacher in a college prep school with many international students. I presently have a number of ELL students auditing my class. I use an ELL interactive adaptive reader to study our literature book deeply. Many of my students cannot get close to understanding 95% of the words at the 9th and 10th grade level. I have to move through the content of my curriculum quickly, but I am also encouraged to teach deeply. How do I do all this in a heterogeneous group?
Well, let me jump in here. This is Margarita. That is the main issue that many high school, middle school teachers, upper grade teachers feel that they need to cover the material and be at a certain place by the end of the week or the month. However, we need to take it slower, teach the students a lot of vocabulary so that they can delve deeper into those texts and practice a lot of the reading comprehension strategies that sometimes get left out as they are breezing through a piece of text in order to answer questions. Take it slowly, and instead of answering questions on a piece of text, ask the students to write the questions and hand them to you so that you can use those questions as well. This will help them to begin to go into a text deeper, learn more vocabulary, and at the same time, learn how to learn, which is what we're trying to do. Later in the semester, or a couple of weeks later, you'll see that all of this slowing down really pays off because it will accelerate their learning.
Terrific. And that brings us to the conclusion. I want to turn it over to Laura Sullivan to end the meeting. We will get everybody's questions answered over the next week. And thank you. Maura?
Hi, everyone. This is Maura from Corwin. And as Jeff says, we are logging all of the questions, and we will personally respond to all of them. I just want to thank you all for attending our webinar, and of course, Ivannia Soto, Jeff Zwiers, David and Yvonne Freeman, and Margarita Calderon for an excellent presentation. Within the next 3 days, look for an email containing your PD certificate, a copy of the PowerPoints, which I urge you to share with your staff, and as a special thanks, the opportunity to buy all 4 books in this series individually at a 20% discount, along with free shipping, and along with a bundle discount of even more savings. So thank you, very grateful for your attendance, and I hope you're happy with what you hear here and expect a lot more from us soon.